Okay, let's dive into one of the most unsettling, strangest true stories of the 20th century. This is a tale that doesn't just blur the lines between love and obsession, it completely smashes them apart and takes us somewhere, well, somewhere truly macabre. I mean, think about it for a second. What really happens when someone refuses to let go? For one man, that refusal led him down a path so dark, it's honestly hard to believe it really happened. His story is just a chilling answer to what can happen when devotion curdles into something else. We could start this story in a lot of places, but I think this old newspaper clipping from 1940 is the perfect spot. The headline says, Carl Van Kossel gains freedom. And then there's this line. It says, he was jailed for a strange love that impelled him to keep a young woman's body in his bedroom for 7 years. Just that one sentence, it raises 1,000 questions, right? Yeah, so he was declared legally sane and then just let go. But that headline, that's really the end of the story. To understand how any of this could have possibly happened, we have to go all the way back. So the chain of events that actually put Tanzler in that jail cell, it didn't start with his crime. It started with its discovery. It all came to a head in Key West, Florida back in October of 1940. And it was all fueled by years of whispers and some really disturbing rumors. For a while, people in town had been talking about this eccentric guy, Carl Tanzler. There were these whispers. People were saying he was sleeping with the corpse of a young woman who had died, a woman named Elena Hoyos. When Elena's own sister, Florinda, finally heard these horrible rumors, she went right to Tanzler's house to confront him. And what she found inside? It wasn't a rumor. It was a literal waking nightmare. She reportedly found Tanzler with her sister's body, and he was dancing with it right in front of an open window. Can you even imagine? Florinda, of course, immediately called the police, and the full, horrifying truth started to come out. Tanzler was arrested. But to make any sense of this absolutely shocking discovery, we first need to understand who these people were. So who was this man, Carl Tanzler? To even begin to grasp the obsession that drove him to do something like this, we've got to look at his very peculiar life story and this so-called vision that basically defined it. So this is George Carl Tanzler. He was a German-born radiology technologist who, for some reason, insisted everyone call him Count Carl von Kossel. Now, he was actually married and had children, but in 1927, he just up and left his family, moved to Key West for a job, and apparently to chase a vision that had haunted him since he was a kid. And this is where the story gets, well, even weirder. He had this lifelong, unshakable belief that the ghost of a long-dead countess, an ancestor of his, had shown him the face of his one true love. This single, driving vision would guide everything he did for the rest of his life and set the stage for a truly tragic obsession. And then, one day in a Key West hospital in 1930, Tanzler's vision walked right through the door. The moment he met this young patient, his world, and unfortunately hers, was changed forever. Her name was Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos. She was a beautiful, young Cuban-American woman, a real local beauty. But in Tanzler's mind, she was more than that. She was the woman from his vision. The tragedy was, when they met, she had just been diagnosed with tuberculosis, which back then was pretty much a death sentence. I mean, the whole dynamic was unsettling from the very beginning. You had this aging, eccentric radiologist on one side, and on the other, this vibrant young woman whose life was just fading away. For Tanzler, though, this was destiny. He became instantly and totally obsessed with her. He immediately took over her care, trying all these bizarre, unconventional treatments and showering her family with gifts. He told her he loved her, but there's absolutely no evidence that Elena ever felt the same way. And despite everything he did, she died in October of 1931. But his obsession? It didn't die with her. He convinced her family to let him pay for this grand mausoleum, and he went to visit her grave every single night. But for Tanzler, just visiting wasn't enough. Not even death could stop his fixation. 2 years after Elena died, Tanzler's grief, or maybe something much, much darker, drove him to do something that still just defies belief. In his mind, he had a perfectly good reason. Tanzler claimed that Elena's spirit would visit him at her grave every night, singing to him and begging him to take her home. So, in April of 1933, he did exactly that. He stole her body from the mausoleum, put it in a child's toy wagon, and wheeled it back to his house. For the next 7 years, he lived with her corpse. As her body, inevitably decomposed, he went to these grotesque lengths to preserve her. It's really gruesome. He painstakingly wired her bones together with piano wire. He replaced her decaying skin with silk cloth that was soaked in wax and plaster, and he put glass eyes into her sockets. He made a wig from her own hair, stuffed her torso with rags to keep its shape, and then he dressed her and kept her in his bed, dousing the body in perfumes and disinfectants to try and mask the smell. Which brings us right back to 1940 and his arrest. Now, you'd expect a story like this to end with a life sentence, right? But what happened next was maybe the strangest part of this entire bizarre story. So a psychiatric exam found him competent enough to stand trial. But unbelievably, the case was just dismissed. And you want to know why? The statute of limitations for the crime of grave robbing had run out. After confessing to living with a dead body for 7 years, Carl Tanzler just walked free. But before Elena could finally be laid to rest, the story took one last ghoulish turn. The authorities, in a move that is just unthinkable today, put her desecrated remains on public display at a funeral home. And the number of people who lined up to go stare was nearly 7,000. Elena's body, the object of this one man's twisted private obsession, was turned into a public spectacle. After this final indignity, her family buried her in a secret, unmarked grave, just determined that she should finally be allowed to rest in peace. And yet, despite the absolute horror of his crimes, public reaction was strangely mixed. A lot of people didn't see Tanzler as a monster. They saw him as some kind of misguided, eccentric romantic. This bizarre sympathy, maybe fueled by the sensationalism of it all, has become a central part of this story's really dark legacy. As for Tanzler, he moved away from Key West, but now that he was separated from Elena's actual body, he just made a new one. He created a life-sized effigy of her using a death mask. He lived with this doll until he died in 1952. His obsession never ended. It just found a new, inanimate object. So in the end, we're left with this question, aren't we? Was Carl Tanzler some kind of romantic, just driven to madness by grief? Or was he a disturbed necrophile whose obsession violated every single boundary of human decency? It's a case that still disturbs and fascinates us, and it forces us to look into the absolute darkest corners of the human heart.